That old dam is a liability, not a legacy, Corrine Ashworth said, tapping her clipboard against the door of her white Range Rover. The board voted. It's coming down Friday. Tuesday, 2:47 p.m. I remember the time because I write everything down. 40 years of dam inspections will do that to a man. I stood in the gravel turnout above the spillway, watching a woman in a cream-coloured blazer talk about my grandfather's dam like it was a busted water heater. That structure has a name, I told her. Colson Dam. My grandfather built it by hand in 1938. It's not coming down Friday or any other day. She smiled the way people smile at something they've already decided doesn't matter. Mr. Colson, the Homeowners Association, owns the shoreline easement. We're creating 40 premium waterfront lots. 60,000 a lot. You do the math. I did the math. $2.4 million. I just didn't know yet how much of it was already spent or whose pocket it had landed in. By the time the snow came off the mountains that spring, Corrine Ashworth would owe more than money. She'd owe restitution, running past $2.6 million. She'd owe an apology to a 78-year-old widow on oxygen who almost lost everything because of what happened in that valley. And she'd owe the state of Colorado an explanation for why she blew a hole in a federally mapped flood control structure without a permit, without an engineer, and without asking the one man whose name was still on the deed to every drop of water behind it. That's the part she never checked. She checked property records for the shoreline, she checked zoning, she never checked who actually owned the reservoir. I did. 41 years as a certified dam safety engineer taught me one thing above everything else. Water always finds the weak point. So do the people who think they can outsmart it. By the end of that spring, Corrine Ashworth would be standing in front of a courtroom, in handcuffs, in a valley that was still drying out. And she'd be asking the same question everybody asks after they've underestimated the wrong old man. How did you know? I'll tell you how, but first you need to understand what that dam meant and what she blew apart to get her beachfront view. What would you do if someone destroyed 3 generations of your family's work for a real estate listing? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how many of you have an HOA story worse than mine. I doubt it, but try me. My name is Walter Colson. I'm 67 years old, and until 11 years ago, I spent my career inspecting earthen dams for the state of Colorado. Small dams mostly, ranch ponds, irrigation reservoirs, the kind of structures nobody thinks about until they fail, and then everybody wants to know why nobody was watching. I was always watching. It's the only thing I know how to do well. My grandfather, Silas Colson, came to this valley in 1936 with a mule team, a homestead claim, and a fear of water he'd carried since he watched a flash flood take his cousin's whole family in Kansas in 1913. He didn't trust rivers. He didn't trust snowmelt. So when he bought the land at the head of what's now called Colson Hollow, the first thing he did, before he built a house, before he dug a well, was build a dam. He built it the way men built things back then, slow and by hand, and over-engineered because he didn't trust anybody else's numbers, including his own. 2 years of hauling clay core material by mule sled, a spillway cut through solid rock with dynamite he set himself, 1 stick at a time, because he wanted the release channel wide enough that no flood in his lifetime or his grandson's would ever top that crest. He finished it in 1938. He carved the date into a cornerstone at the base of the spillway wall, along with his initials, SC 1938. I used to run my thumb over those letters when I was a boy, feeling the grooves worn smooth by 60 years of runoff spray. The reservoir behind it he called Colson Lake, though it was never much more than a long silver ribbon of water cupped in granite, maybe 80 acres at full pool. Below it, the valley floor spread out flat and green, fed by irrigation ditches he dug the same summer he finished the dam. That valley is where our cattle grazed, where my father built the ranch house in 1951, using lumber his own father had cut and cured, where 3 generations of Colsons are buried, under cottonwoods my grandfather planted the year the dam went in. I can still smell that valley on a June morning, cut hay and diesel from the old tractor nobody ever got rid of, and the mineral smell of lake water sliding over the spillway apron, quiet as breathing. My grandfather used to say, "A well-built dam doesn't roar, it whispers. If you ever hear it roar, something's already gone wrong." He died in 1979 and left the ranch, the dam, and the water rights to my father. My father left them to me in 1998, along with a filing cabinet full of engineering reports, water rights adjudications, and a hand-drawn note that said, "Don't ever let anybody touch that spillway without a permit." I did not know, sitting in a lawyer's office at 41 years old, how literally I would need to take those words one day. By the time I inherited the ranching business around it had changed. Cattle prices were down, land prices were up. A developer bought the adjoining 1,100 acres in 2009 and built what became Lakeshore Estates, 60-some homes clustered around the reservoir my grandfather dug with mule teams, marketed to retirees who wanted a mountain lake lifestyle without understanding the first thing about what kept that lake in its basin. I sold them water rights access under an easement agreement, kept my ranch parcel and the dam itself, and figured we'd coexist. I was wrong about that too. Corrine Ashworth became HOA president in 2019, 3 years after her husband's construction company built half the homes in the subdivision at a healthy markup. She drove a leased Range Rover the colour of vanilla ice cream, wore blazers that cost more than my truck payment, and carried a clipboard everywhere like it was a badge of office. She had a talent, a real gift, for making homeowners feel stupid for asking questions. I watched her operate at HOA meetings I attended only because state law required notice to easement holders. She'd stand at the podium, tap that clipboard, and say things like, "The board has full authority under the covenants," in a tone that dared anybody to check whether that was true. Nobody ever checked, until I did. Her real business, it turned out, wasn't running a homeowners association. It was selling water views to people who didn't know how water worked, and in the spring of that year, she decided the easiest way to sell 40 more lots at $60,000 apiece was to blow the top off a dam my grandfather built to keep an entire valley from drowning. The notice came taped to my gate on a Wednesday morning, tucked inside a plastic sleeve like it was something official. I remember because I was already up, feeding the 2 horses I still kept, and the sky was doing that pink thing it does over the ridge before the sun clears it. 6:14 a.m. I wrote it on the back of the notice itself, because that's a habit 41 years of state inspections beats into you. Time, date, condition of the document, condition of the gate. Everything gets a record. The notice said Colson Ranch, LLC, a name I never registered, for a company I never formed, was in violation of Lakeshore Estates Design Review Guidelines, Section 4.2, for obstruction of common area capital improvements. Fine, $500 a day, retroactive to the previous Monday. $4,000, already owed, for a violation I hadn't committed on a property that wasn't even part of the HOA. My ranch parcel sat outside the subdivision boundary, had since 1938. The dam and spillway sat on land my grandfather patented from the federal government before Lakeshore Estates was a gravel road with a sales trailer. The HOA had no covenant authority over me, none. But that's the thing about a fake fine. It isn't designed to survive a courtroom. It's designed to make you show up somewhere and start arguing on their terms instead of yours. I didn't argue. I photographed the notice, front and back, with a newspaper beside it for the date. I mailed myself a copy, certified, return receipt, the oldest trick in the book for time-stamping evidence without a lawyer in the room yet. Then I drove up to the spillway to see what capital improvement meant. There were 3 men in orange vests standing at the crest of the dam with a driller, a compressor, and a set of blasting mats rolled out like carpet. A fourth man in a hard hat was measuring the spillway notch with a laser level, calling numbers to somebody with a clipboard. Corinne Ashworth stood a little apart from them in white sneakers that had never touched dirt before, holding a coffee cup with a lid, watching the crew work like she was supervising a kitchen remodel. "Mrs. Ashworth," I kept my voice level. 41 years inspecting dams for the state, you learn that panic never fixes a failure. Only calm, methodical pressure does. "What permit are you operating under?" She turned, and I watched her decide, in about half a second, that I was a problem to be managed rather than a question to be answered. "Mr. Coulson, this is HOA common property. We have full board authorization." "This isn't HOA property. This is my dam, built by my grandfather in 1938, patented land, private reservoir." "You're standing on my spillway apron. Our surveyor says the shoreline easement extends to this notch." She tapped the clipboard, the same gesture I'd watched her make 100 times at meetings, like the board minutes were scripture. "We're widening it. 40 premium lots need direct water access, and this notch is choking the shoreline. Once it's opened up, water level drops 18 inches, and we get 40 feet of beach on every lot." I felt something go cold in my chest that had nothing to do with the mountain air. That notch is the spillway. It's not decoration. It's rated for a specific discharge capacity. You widen it, you change the entire hydraulic profile of that dam. She smiled the smile she'd given me the day she told me the dam was coming down. "We had an engineer look at it." "Whose engineer?" "My husband's firm does the assessments for the board." She said it like that answered anything. I asked for the assessment in writing. She said I'd get a copy through proper channels. I asked for the blasting permit. She said the contractor had all necessary authorizations. I asked, one more time, whether anyone had filed for a Colorado Division of Water Resources dam safety review before altering a jurisdictional dam structure, which state law requires under CRS Section 37-87-105 for any dam over the size threshold. And mine cleared that threshold by a wide margin. 40 years of state inspection reports on file to prove it. She didn't answer that one. She just looked at her watch and said the crew had a schedule to keep, and could I please move my truck? It was blocking the equipment trailer. I moved my truck. I photographed the license plates on every vehicle at that site. I wrote down every name I could read off a hard hat or a work order clipped to a dashboard. And I drove home and wrote a certified letter to the HOA board. Not to Corinne personally, to the whole board. 5 names, 5 addresses, informing them, in writing, with statute citations, that any alteration to the Coulson Dam spillway, without state dam safety review, and my written consent as riparian rights holder and reservoir owner, would constitute a violation of state law and a trespass on private property. I sent that letter, certified mail, return receipt requested, on a Thursday. I have the receipt. I have the date stamp. I have a copy in a fireproof box and another copy in a safe deposit box at the bank in town, because I learned a long time ago that paperwork only protects you if it survives the same disaster the other side is planning. Here's what most homeowners don't know. An HOA board can vote on anything it wants in a closed meeting, but a vote doesn't override state jurisdiction over a regulated dam, and it doesn't override a deed. Corinne Ashworth had spent 3 years building a kingdom on the assumption that nobody would ever check whether her authority actually reached as far as her clipboard suggested. I was about to check. That weekend, I drove into town to the county recorder's office, and I started pulling every document that existed on Lakeshore Estates, going back to the original 2009 development plat. I wanted to know exactly what the HOA thought it owned and exactly what it didn't. What I found took me 3 days and a legal pad full of notes, and it changed the entire shape of what I thought I was dealing with. The shoreline easement Corinne kept citing didn't exist as a recorded document. It existed as a line on a marketing brochure her husband's company had printed in 2019, the same year she became board president, showing future beach lot expansion along the reservoir's north shore. No recorded easement, no water rights transfer, nothing filed with the state engineer's office. She'd been selling a promise drawn in Photoshop. But the real find was buried in a box of old inspection files I still kept from my working years, files that predated my retirement, back when I still consulted part-time for the state on request. In 2016, the HOA's own engineer, not Corinne's husband's firm, a different one, hired before she took over, had flagged the spillway notch as at or near design capacity during peak snowmelt events and recommended no alteration without full hydraulic modelling. That report had gone to the board. The board had signed a written waiver acknowledging the risk and declining further study, citing cost. I found my own name on a courtesy copy of that 2016 report, sent to me as the reservoir's registered owner, a fact I'd have sworn I remembered filing away and half forgotten in the years since. I still had my acknowledgement letter, the one where I'd written in plain language that any future modification without state dam safety review would require my consent as owner of record. That letter was 9 years old. Nobody on the current board had bothered to read the file before Corinne decided a wider notch meant a wider beach. Then I found the other thing, tucked in a bank statement a homeowner had photographed and mailed to me anonymously after my certified letter went around the board. A woman who'd apparently grown tired of not understanding where her HOA dues went. 40 lot sales, $60,000 each, closed through an LLC controlled by Corinne's husband's company. $2.4 million, collected over 18 months. And a separate line item, $180,000, withdrawn from the HOA Reserve Fund for shoreline reconstruction consulting, paid to a management company registered at Corinne Ashworth's home address. I sat at my kitchen table with that bank statement and the 2016 engineering report side by side, and I understood, for the first time, that this wasn't a woman being careless with somebody else's dam. This was a woman running a machine. Sell water views nobody had the right to sell. Bury the reserve fund in consulting fees paid to herself. And blow the one obstacle in the way, a 100-year-old wall of clay and rock my grandfather built with a mule team, because widening that notch was the only thing standing between her and 40 more $60,000 checks. It was around then that Eleanor Briggs knocked on my door. I knew Eleanor a little, 78 years old, widow of a Korean War veteran, lived alone in a single-story home on Lot 12, the closest house to the base of the spillway, with an oxygen concentrator humming in the corner of her living room and a flag she still raised every morning at 7 a.m. sharp, same as her husband had for 40 years before he passed. She stood on my porch in a cardigan, breathing tube looped over her ears, holding a violation notice of her own. "They fined me $800, she said, voice thin but steady, because my late husband's flagpole is 2 inches over the height restriction. Corinne says if I don't pay by Friday, she's putting a lien on my house. Walter, I'm on a fixed income. I don't have $800 for a flagpole." I looked at that notice, dated the same week as mine, worded in the same clipped, clipboard language, and I understood that Corinne Ashworth wasn't just building a beach. She was clearing a valley of anyone who might ask a question loud enough for the wrong person to hear. An old man who owned the water, and an old woman who owned nothing but a flag and a fixed income and a spillway sitting a quarter mile from her front door. "Eleanor," I said, "don't pay it. Don't pay a dime. And whatever you do, don't sign anything they send you." She looked up at me, hope and confusion both crossing her face at once. "Why not?" "Because I don't think that fine's going to matter much longer," I said. "I think Corinne Ashworth has bigger problems